Hey, everybody. This is very exciting. This is episode 401, and this is my first interview in 3 or 4 years. On this episode, I interview Jennie Ketcham Crooks, who is a very complex person. She's a licensed therapist. She's also an ex-adult entertainer. And we talk about her life and what led her to the desire to pursue a different relation to digital media, a more intentional and thoughtful relationship to it. It's a wide-ranging conversation, and there's some really, really interesting points in there, so I think you'll enjoy it. So be sure to listen all the way through and then go visit Jennie and check out her new book when it comes out. Enjoy. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. I'm a clinical psychologist and a self-help author from Southern California. My goal is to make mental health content for real people, just like you. And in this show, I answer your questions or dive deep into topics related to life, psychology, mental health, relationships, and more. Please be aware that sometimes I use some spicy language, and I also don't shy away from sensitive topics, but I will try to give you a content warning whenever it's relevant. So if all this sounds good to you, let's get started. Cool. All right, we have a guest today, everybody. We have Jennie Ketcham Crooks. Jennie is a licensed therapist and anxiety specialist, the author of a new book that's coming out on July 2nd called Look Up, The 30-Day Path to Digital Minimalism and Real-Life Maximalism, which provides a comprehensive 30-day guide to managing digital overconsumption through evidence-based interventions, helping us build a meaningful real-world connection and align our actions with our values. Jennie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Robert. Super excited to be here.
How are you feeling today?
So some nervousness. It's always sort of an interesting thing talking to another mental health professional about this thing that you really, really care about. And that, I suspect that when you first started the podcast, I don't know, maybe you had some concern about oh my God, what are my colleagues going to think of me? You know what I mean? Because we get to do all our work behind closed doors. And so this is a huge exposure for me, and you are now totally part of my exposure process.
You know, it's really, okay, this is really fucking funny. I was going to give you a vulnerable moment and say the same thing. So you are also part of my anxiety exposure. I used to do interviews on this podcast. It's been several years though. So you're like my first interview in a few years. And I didn't think I was super nervous about it. But last night I literally had 3 dreams about different ways that this crashed and burned. So we'll ride that wave together.
I love it. I love us riding the nervousness wave. And you know what? Maybe we can crash and burn both of these things together and see if we can survive, right?
I'll cover you. You'll cover me.
Yeah. That's right. We will get up from the ashes and we will rise again. Damn it.
That's really funny. Okay, so we'll get into stuff. In learning more about you in preparation for this interview, it seems like you've lived a number of lives already. And I don't know how old you are. We seem to be of generally similar age. So it seems like you've lived a lot of life. These days, where do you consider your story to start?
What a great and complicated question. I don't actually know the answer to that, frankly, right? I think as a feature of having all of these different lives and having lived just a really rich and layered existence, right? There seems to be more of I feel like my time is more like a spiral, right? And there's times where I sort of spiral up, and then there's times when I sort of spiral down, right? And I feel like right now it's part of the spiral up program, but I don't know necessarily that there is a stop or start as much as there is just a up or down.
That's a good way to put it. So I'm glad that you're in an up spiral right now. You got a lot going on. I believe you semi-recently started a new anxiety clinic as well, right? Mm-hmm. How did you find your way into studying as a social worker, becoming a therapist? Why that?
Yeah. So some years back, I was an adult film performer, right? I was in porn and I was performing and I was directing. And a lot of the porn that I was doing and the directing, the movies that I was directing, they were educational and also really fun. And so there was this sort of like flavor of like teaching involved, and connection has always been something that I really value. So as a joke, I signed up for this VH1 like sex rehab thing with Dr. Drew. I thought this will be great for my porn career, right? Like I'm clearly a workaholic. Like this will just, everyone will know who I am, and there will be no impact from joining. Just like so fucking naive. And so I end up in rehab, and in rehab for sex, you also can't drink Jack Daniels or use cocaine. And so that sort of really started to shift things for me. And so I quit, perhaps as like a natural consequence of getting sober and starting to have feelings and being called Jennie. It was this really sort of transformative thing. I realized I hadn't built any of my adult identity as Jennie
versus
Ketcham.
like your performer name.
100%, 100%. And so it was this really sort of like disorienting thing. And so VH1 actually paid for a bunch of aftercare for me. They were like, "Oh, we're so sorry. We didn't realize this was going to open such a can of worms for you. Let's go ahead and pay for some therapy." So I kept going to therapy. And once those funds ran out, the therapist actually continued. So Jill was my therapist. And I saw another, a psychiatrist, like as a mentor, a guy named Dr. Reef. And they continued to see me for years beyond what VH1 paid for. And I didn't have shit. I didn't have any money because I left porn and I went back to school and I started working as a waitress, right? And their guidance just transformed who I thought I could be, right? And they just opened the door to this huge life, and Dr. Drew as well, right? Like these mental health professionals just like gave me a life that I never could have imagined, and they let me see it, right? Like they like gave me flashlights and were like, "Look around." It was like, holy shit. And so, I really wanted to be able to have that kind of meaning in someone's life. And so I went back to school for it. And so, went back to school for it, got my clinical social work. I was also a little bit nervous about being pigeonholed into one specific thing. And so, which is why I went with the master's in social work instead of like a MFT or something like that, right? Like I wanted a little bit more of a robust education in
flexibility.
That way. Yeah, exactly. And so the rest is kind of history. I ended up with this really wonderful mentor named Becky Rosenthal, who is just a brilliant clinician and so loving. And she did a lot of trauma and a lot of like OCD and anxiety work. And so I ended up getting a lot of that experience in my internship phase, and then worked in primary care for a few years as like a brief interventionist, and saw so much health anxiety and so much PTSD that hadn't been diagnosed as PTSD. And so that, and OCD also as part and parcel of that health anxiety business. But, and so then that sort of really started to shape like, oh yes, this is where I want to go. Like I feel so connected to this work, and ended up in private practice and then made the jump to start my own.
Upward spiral, as you said.
Upward spiral. That's right.
Yeah. I want to ask a question. You don't have to answer it necessarily if you don't want to. I'm just curious, is the part of you that got into kind of the educational sphere of adult performing, is that the same part of you that wanted to get into therapy? Like, do they kind of come from the same place in a way?
Totally. I think there is this consistency of self and values that has sort of like been the thread in the tapestry of my life, right? Like intimacy and like vulnerability is something that has been important to me since I was young. And using that as a vehicle for connection has always been easy. Right. And so in my younger years, in my young adulthood, it was like, okay, intimacy and vulnerability means like fucking, right? It was this very sort of like clear cut, like, oh, I know how to like connect and like feel vulnerable with people. Like you fuck them. Right. and then like as I grew and my prefrontal cortex finished developing, it was like, oh, we're going to need a little bit more than that, aren't we? Like, and so I think that, yeah. And then the teaching part was also a part of it. Right. And the writing part, I've always loved writing. I've always loved literature, and I'm a voracious reader. Like I devour, content. And so, yeah, there are all of these like really salient themes that have been present through the entirety of my life, and yeah, I think that they're the same then as now. There's that consistency.
I'm assuming you were always people's therapist, even when you weren't a therapist as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was, and even in the context of doing sex work, it was like, yeah, like that was a big part of it. And there was a lot of healing there that happened for people, whether it was in like BDSM work. I was a dominatrix for a while. And so that was like a lot of my clients would show up with a lot of shame there.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, this is a place where you can just like what you like. And that it's fine that you like, this is totally acceptable. Like you are acceptable just as you are. And so, yeah, I think that throughout my experience, whether I'm working with like sex clients or like mental health clients, getting to model this like radical acceptance of who they are and where they are and what they like in their lives, that has also been consistent and really beautiful in my life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate you being open about it. I know that you've talked about, sort of your history in the industry before. I know that it can be a very, negative bent because there were a lot of negative aspects of it for you as well. But I think it's really interesting to hear this aspect of it, that like why you gravitated toward it, why it was easy for you, and why that, led to where you are now in some ways. So I appreciate it. I want to hear more now about sort of, so obviously we talked about your book. So we're talking about reducing overconsumption of digital media. Where did this interest start to come in? Where did this pop up from?
It is summer, and I love summer where I live. It's a great place to spend time outside, whether it's cruising around town or hitting the beach, which isn't too far away. However, I always do this thing where as soon as the sun comes out, I instantly go out in a tank top and I get the worst burn, which leads to the worst tan lines. I'm an idiot. It happens every single time. That's why I'm super excited that I got a random package in the mail with OneSkin's new product, which is Body SPF Mineral Sunscreen. I often hate the feeling of sunscreen on my skin, but this stuff feels very good. It's very lightweight. It's very similar to the other OneSkin products that are out there. It has over 30 SPF and it's water resistant up to 80 minutes. And even better, it's powered by the revolutionary OS1 peptide, which targets skin aging at the cellular level. So you're basically protecting and healing your skin at the same time. So for summer, OneSkin has introduced their summer skincare essentials, which includes their daily moisturizers and broad spectrum sunscreens for your face and body. Definitely a great option if you're like me and you can just use a simple skincare regime that will help you out on the sunny days. For a limited time, you guys, the listeners, can get an exclusive 15% off your first OneSkin purchase using the code DUFF, D-U-F-F, when you check out at oneskin.co. That's DUFF at oneskin.co.
Yeah. So early on in my work in private practice, I started to notice that a lot of my clients, a lot of my socially anxious clients, and a lot of my clients with body dysmorphia or like health-focused OCD, right? Like they were using their smartphones in a way that was would like really disconnect and actually ended up reinforcing a lot of their symptoms, right? So whether it's like when they get into an elevator, they plug into their phone instead of just making idle chit chat, right? Like that makes you more socially anxious because then you start to believe that you need your phone in order to be in an elevator, right? Or like body dysmorphia, where like just like that constant stream, the algorithm that just feeds you what your body is supposed to look like, which as someone who has suffered with body dysmorphia, that is such a disorienting experience to see these bodies online and be like, oh, fuck, like those are not my tits, right? Like not anymore, right? Like 2 kids down, I'm like, those are not the girls. Like they,
right.
And then the same with like OCD, like any sort of like health focused thing. Like you go on Dr. Google and like pretty soon you think you need Google in order to like know, like, you know,
You're going to find what you're looking for. Like, does this mean I'm dying? Google's going to say, yeah, probably.
Definitely. And absolutely. And then like that, like inability to tolerate the uncertainty of like, do I have a cold or do I have cancer? Right. Like that inability to tolerate certainty starts to generalize into these other really important areas in your life. So I started to see a lot of clients who are overusing their phones in that way. And then I noticed that I was doing it in these really subtle ways, right? In moments of boredom, right? It wasn't even like aversive, right? It wasn't like I
were escaping you were escaping to your phone necessarily.
Totally. It was just like, well, what do I do now? Well, I guess I'll read another BBC article, right? Like the same fucking one over and over again. And so I started doing like really subtle things like that. And I started noticing it, right? And then there was this like inciting event, this like, aha, like, oh, Jesus, Jennie. So it's Super Bowl Sunday. We have some friends over. My older daughter, Elsie, at the time, she was about 11 months, and she was sort of like scooting along the coffee table, right? Like she's just learning how to walk. And we're watching the Super Bowl, and I've got my phone in my hand, and she's just like doing her thing, and you know, people are around and laughing, and I get this thought, this like errant thought about Snooki from Jersey Shore.
Yeah.
Love her, right? Like, of course, we all have errant thoughts about
who
Snooki.
doesn't?
Like, who doesn't? You know, just like have thoughts about. So I wonder what she's doing, right? And instead of tolerating the uncertainty, or just sort of like seeing that thought as a leaf on a stream, like, oh, that's funny. Like, we're just thinking about Snooki on a random Sunday, you know? I did a little deep dive. I started diving into like Snooki content. Like, oh, I've got to find this out. Like, I have got to see. Yeah. And I missed Elsie's first step. And it was such a, like, she's taken many steps since. She's 6 now. She runs. She's a tiptoe walker. We're working on that. But like, but that day was her first, and you only get to slice that cake once.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
Even thinking about it, like I feel.
Yeah, I can see.
You know, like it like, what a shame to miss such a moment, and it'll fade. You know, like those moments always fade.
Sure.
Right? Like,
yeah, I have 2 kids. I don't necessarily remember their first, but I don't think that I missed them either.
Totally right, and it is the regret of missing it that like haunts me, you know? And I mean, haunt might be a little bit traumatic, but nevertheless, like,
obviously it's sticking with you. Like, here it is. It
sticks, right? Like, those little humans are so important to me. And like, God, I mean, you've got kids, like it goes so fast, you know? So I don't want to miss it. Like, Brenda, she's my unhelpful secretary that lives in my mind. She is going to misfile things anyway, right? And it's all gonna fade and turn into like yellowed paper. But I would rather have it turn into yellowed paper than like, oh, do we even have that as a file?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm imagining this is the origin of your book title.
Yeah. Yeah. It's time to look up. Yeah. See what you're missing. Right. And so I started looking for other, for literature, naturally, as one does when one is a voracious reader and a clinician, and looking for evidence-based. It's like, has anybody like created a structured approach to deal with this? And I found a few things. None of them were necessarily like clinical books or clinically oriented. There was some loose frameworks, like some like productivity, like how to be more productive. Like Cal Newport has a great like digital minimalism. And,
oh, sure.
That, you know, like that had like a flavor of what I was looking for, but it wasn't necessarily like there wasn't like an adventure quality to it.
Yeah. So why didn't it totally fit? Like, what was missing from just kind of the digital minimalism stuff that's out there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the like how right? It's like, this is what you do. But I think there is a how that is missing, and like I don't want to say like hand holding, but changing our habits is really hard, right? It's really hard to change behavior. And I think that most of us will say in our minds, like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to change it, and we sort of like create these really grand, elaborate plans to go to the gym and to lose weight and to only eat fucking salads every day, right? And then, 3 weeks in, the goals that we've set are, we're either not hitting them, or the efforting that is required to hit them is so monumental that we can't necessarily sustain it, right? And so I needed something that was more a softer, gentler way, right? That was, and that would actually generalize to the rest of my life. Right, which is where ACT comes in, right? Like the whole 30-day path is process-based.
I was going to say
right?
ACT was like oozing out of some of the stuff that I, read about the book, the kind of values, tapping into that and stuff. So I was going to ask if that was a part of your focus.
100%. So I'm an ACT therapist first and foremost, and I do ERP as well, right?
People
and
might not know what those
training.
mean on here. So can you say what ACT is, just briefly?
Yeah. So alphabet soup. So my apologies. So ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's based around this theory of psychological flexibility, which says that there are 6 different processes that get kind of mucked up when we become like mentally unhealthy, or when we're suffering psychologically. ERP is exposure and response prevention, so that we practice feeling anxious and then not doing the thing that we feel like keeps us safe, which is what you and I are doing right now. You're interviewing me, I'm talking about clinical work, right? Like we are exposing ourselves to feeling very anxious, and the response prevention
we're crying, we're sweating.
100%, right? And we're not going to avoid it. We're just going to lean in and bring it on. And then habit reversal training it's HRT. It's just like it sounds, right? It is this idea of like stimulus control and then like environmental modifications, and allowing yourself to like feel the urge to do a habit and then not do it. So very similar to exposure and response prevention, but focused more so on a lot of like micro things like ticks. I mean, ticks aren't necessarily micro things, but they're a little bit more subtle.
Yeah. Small events. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you had this sort of background in terms of your interest in training already, and then you kind of stumbled into this idea that you personally really need to look up. You're noticing how people need to, and there's a bridge there where, the digital minimalism stuff wasn't necessarily addressing the how part, the nitty gritty of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, I had all of that as a background. And what the book actually first started as was an 8-week curriculum, kind of like mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness-based relapse prevention. So one of the things that I really focused on when I came into this therapy work was alcohol use disorder and substance use disorder. And it was from that mindfulness-based relapse prevention stance, right? Which is, it's all harm reduction. It's about noticing that those thoughts and urges to use are still present with you, and we can tolerate them and not respond to them. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to have an 8-week group that actually helps people with putting down their phones in that way? And so I started to put that together. And as I started to put together the curriculum for it, I thought, oh shit, well, I think this can actually be a lovely like 30-day like challenge that people can do independent of a group. A group, there's some bar you have to get over to get into a group, right? Like there has to be facilitator, there has to be other people who sign up for the group. It's temporally oriented, so you have to like be there at the right time,
it's
at the
scary.
Right place. It's scary. Yeah, totally. So the workbook seemed like a natural, easy thing to do. And like far more accessible to a lot of the people who are probably really needing this than an 8-week format.
So how does somebody gauge whether they're overexposing themselves? Like, what does that kind of mean to you? I imagine maybe it varies from person to person. Like, how does somebody know if they're in that spot?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's 2 ways we can gauge, right? Like we can think about it in a really sort of structured way, like we think about like alcohol use disorder, right? Like how do you know if you are using too much alcohol, right? And so there are recommendations for how much alcohol we consume. I think it's like a glass of wine a day, or maybe I think they've reduced it basically to a glass of wine a day, or like 1 beverage per day. And a beverage is like a measured
like 6
amount,
ounce
right?
or whatever.
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
we're all screwed. We're all we're all on the chart for that.
Yeah, totally. So we could go at it like with a really like objective measure like that, right? Like you could just open up your phone and see how much you're using it, right? And if it is over a certain amount, or if you're using it and you see that, because it's going to be a little bit subjective even there, right? Like if you open up your phone and you see 2 hours and you're like, ugh, like I'm 2 hours is actually a lot of my day, right? Like that's a lot of time in my day, like with kids and with, or you could open it up and it could be just sort of like an alarming amount, like 6 hours or 8 hours, right? And so I think something that can be really helpful to do is, and I have a really fun math problem in there because Brenda likes coming up with the problems she can solve, right? And so I have a fun math problem there that actually helps you figure out how many years of your life you will give to looking at your phone if you continue on the way that you're going, right? And so that number can help you decide. Or if you just take the day and you go without your phone, or if you allow yourself to wonder, can I go without my phone for a day? And you feel a little uncomfy with that, that might be a worthwhile experience, right? Like that might be a little flag inside of you that, maybe we're not using this in the way that we really want to. And maybe that quiet little voice in there that's like, oh shit, a whole day without our phone, like that seems bananas. Maybe we should listen to that. Maybe we can listen to that, right? And so I think if you're wondering, just like alcohol, like if you're wondering like, oh God, do I need to change my phone use? It's probably a good sign that you can change your smartphone use.
Sure. Like just literally listening to yourself. You're like, I wonder if maybe that's a good idea for me. Maybe so.
Totally.
Yeah.
Let's listen.
Yeah. I mean, when you said like, if you leave your phone at home for a day, you don't have it for a day. Like I bristled a little bit. I'm like, right.
Yeah.
So where do you how do you start, especially with that? Right. Cause I think that, in my experience, I don't tend to push super minimalism with phones and with engagement with, digital stuff. But regardless, if I talk about it in the context of therapy or something else I'm doing, it's natural to be pretty defensive about that, I think, for people. They're like, oh, well, I can't. So how do you address that? Where's the starting point for a lot of people?
Totally. Yeah. And I think that bristle, that defensive, I can't. Like the I can't is such a compelling thought. Right. And like listening to that thought will keep you using it. Right. So I think first is to address some general concerns about the challenge, which, I've talked with a lot of people, and one general misunderstanding is like, oh my God, you want me to go for 30 days without my phone? That's insane. But that's not what it is, right? And so what this practice really is starting to shift your use from unintentional to intentional, right? To having a better sense of choice when you are using it, right? Because how many times do you open up your phone and click on your email and then, your brain just sort of like water slides into something else, right? Like those little like cognitive mistakes happen. And then pretty soon we're in Instagram or the TikToks, right? And so a lot of the book is about gently reducing the amount of time you're using by setting very specific times when you're going to use. And then starting to engage with your device with that sense of choice, right? And really getting to see, like, is using this thing right now making my life better? Is this how I want to spend my time? Or did I just go on autopilot and end up here, right? And so in terms of reduction, it's not a lot at first. It's a couple, it's a couple hours a day that you're reducing. I mean, you're sleeping sometimes, so you should be sleeping. And if you're using your phone and not sleeping, you should definitely do this challenge, right? But it's a very gradual reduction. And aside from 2 days, 2 days you go without touching your phone, right? Just 2 out of the whole 30. The least amount of time that you'll spend sort of choosing to use your phone is 2 hours, right? So the whole idea of this isn't about abstinence or stopping using your phone. It's about shifting the way that you approach your phone and the relationship that you have with it so that you're using it in a way that's really meaningful and intentional.
I like that. So you're not vilifying the phone itself or whatever you're engaging with, and it's not, sort of like digital detox sort of thing,
Yeah.
right? It's more about
Yes.
bringing the intention back to it instead of, I use the metaphor of like, it's like digitally walking to a room and forgetting why you walked into there. So you just start doing something else, slip and fall, wind up on Instagram or what have you.
Yep.
Definitely. And I could see in my own life where I've had to make some adjustments for that, right? Because, one of the things that with this type of, attention to doing less digital stuff that I have a little bit of a hard time with is I feel that it's important to be informed, like about the world, about what's going on and stuff. And right now it's like there's freaking US, Africa, Haiti, Gaza, Ukraine, everywhere there's stuff going on. So it is important to me to have, an informed perspective about that. Also, that doesn't mean that I need to be plugged in 24/7, right? There's a way to do that is more intentional. So I've had to find my own ways to kind of do that.
Totally. How do you find yourself getting the like educational, like the global citizen awareness?
Yeah. Like, so instead of, being tapped in 24/7, I used to use Twitter more and that, what is now X and, that I don't use it very much anymore, but that was a great source of the constant stream of live, news and reactions and things like that. So one thing that I'll do is instead, like, even just before this, I was listening to like, a news podcast. It's like an update for the day, since yesterday. So that gives me sort of a chunk. I can get the basics and what I need to know. I'll often do that with, say, like there's certain YouTube creators that do a similar thing, right? So it'll be synthesized, but it's not necessarily that full live stream. And I kind of trust that if there is something really important that I need to catch up on, it'll come through. So I'm like, hey, did you hear about this? I'm like, no, I can go look into that versus just like waiting, for the thing to pop up.
Yes. Yeah. The slot machine approach.
Uh-huh.
Like maybe this is the time. Maybe this is the time.
Which you don't think about, right? You're not looking for bad news or otherwise, but you refresh and then you get rewarded for it when something like that does happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate the idea of a podcast and specifically as a parent, I'll share with you why, right? Like when my girls, so I have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and when they see me on my phone, they don't know what I'm doing, right? Like they don't know that I'm reading the news and like doing something that is very values driven, right? Like they just see that I am paying attention to the shiny rectangle and not to them, right? And so I love the idea of a podcast that delivers some information because it's something that takes place in a shared space, right? It's not just you and the device. They can be in the room and you can just be listening. You can talk with them about that. You might not want to talk with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. Well, 6-year-old has a lot of fucking questions right now, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But I think for me, what I find is that when the people around me don't know or aren't involved with the things that I'm doing in my phone, it's actually quite disconnecting, right? And even if I'm reading a newspaper, like a like a paper newspaper, right?
They still make those?
They totally do. And they will bring them to your house, which is wild, or you can pick them up. I know. Then the girls actually see me reading something, or even if it's a book, they get to see me reading something, and they get to know, oh, reading is important to mom instead of the shiny rectangle is important to mom. The phone is important to mom, right? And so I try to be really thoughtful about how I communicate my values to my girls and to the people in the room, and like what my behavior says about like our connection at that time, right? And so any sort of activity that can be shared or taught, back to that, like teaching thing that is so important to me. I really want to be able to do that. And there's just this sort of like anonymity, and like I could be looking at porn, like they don't know.
Sure.
I could be scrolling TikTok. They don't know. I could be, reading something that's like really important for work, and they don't know. Right. And so, but my 2-year-old does know that the phone is important to mommy, and she will seek it out and she will bring it to me. And that is something that I'm like, oh, fuck, like I did it again,
Yeah. So you've had that experience of like, the 2-year-old kind of calling you on it, unintentionally.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. She's like, here's this very important thing to you, mommy. Don't forget it. I'm like, oh.
So they're pretty young. So 2 and 6, you said? Yeah. I have 6 and 8. So, I have a 6-year-old, 8-year-old, they're certainly, in school. People love screens, it is the reality of where we are. So as your kids are getting older and you're kind of growing into that stage of parenthood, what's on your mind about how to address this with them, with their own, interactions with technology?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm actually part of a mommy group, and we have one of these like, this is going to be crass. I'm going to say it anyway. Fuck it. Like a middle school pregnancy pact, basically, where like we're not going to give our girls smartphones until they're like 14 years old, right? And so, if they can have phones, they can have a dumb phone, right? Like that has like
Minimal
calling
stuff.
functionality. Yeah, exactly. But and they can feel the like pain of missing out. While their friends, like whose mommies aren't part of the middle school pregnancy pact,
Right.
They can learn how to tolerate FOMO, right? Like that is something that I want them to learn as kids. I would rather them see their friends have a thing and feel like they're missing out on that thing than for them to be looking at carefully curated feeds and missing out on these like imaginary things with these imaginary bodies that aren't realistic, right? And so I have some pretty I don't want to say rigid, but like they're time sensitive.
Specific.
They're not going to get. They're very specific, and I have a group of people who are willing to like keep this commitment with me, which is really meaningful because then we all get to disappoint our children collectively, and then they can share in their misery together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. So that'll be a trip to see as it sort of plays out, but mom, everybody has it, everybody's doing it. But it seems like the driver for you is kind of the same driver that fuels you, which is it's not about the badness of this thing. It's about how important connecting to this thing is. This thing being life. I don't know. How would you express it?
Yeah, 100%, right? Like I think the way that the shiny rectangle interferes with your ability to connect with your peers, it's problematic. In the same way that if you go to dinner with your partner and you both sit on your phones the whole time looking at things, or if just your partner is on their phone the whole time or constantly checking their phone, it interferes with your ability to feel intimately and deeply connected with people. that's a problem, right? And so I want my girls, and I want me, and I want my partner, I want the people in my life to be able to connect without using a YouTube video or without having it be this like asynchronous text. I mean, I have a shit ton of text messages going on right now, these like 5-year long conversations, right? That never stop, which are delightful and easy to access, and also don't necessarily leave me satisfied in terms of that like evolutionary pull to connect with people. And so I want my girls to have an opportunity to learn how to connect with people their own age. And in order to do that, they have to be present with people their own age.
Sure. We all have values or things that we bring into parenting. For some people, it's maybe religion. For some people, it's a certain, other type of value, belief, what have you. And this is one that you're raising your kids with. This is the value of it, direct human connection. So yeah, that makes sense. I understand that. I was curious, do you ever get much like pushback on not necessarily just the kid part and the not having, the pact to not have phones and stuff, but just the idea in general, right? So when you're describing people to a couple sitting at a table, both on their phones, my first thought was like, what if they're both autistic or something like that? I was curious if you ever get any sort of pushback of like, well, that's good for some people, that this just doesn't really apply to me.
I think so I do and I don't, right? Because like I have some autistic clients, and I think if we are over relying on a device in order to connect, then we're not going to be able to build that skill, which the skill can always be built, even if we're autistic, right? Like it can be built in a more subtle way, and it might take a little bit more time, and it might look very different,
Sure.
right? And it communicates something to your partner, right? So if that, it is tough, right? Because like topographically, you look at a couple at the restaurant, maybe they're autistic, maybe they actually can't speak, right? And so maybe they are communicating via text right there in that moment, right? That for me is a brilliant values-oriented use of technology to connect. Right? You are here together, you are face to face, and you are overcoming the ways in which just neurophysiologically you have been disabled, right? Like that's fucking amazing, right? And that's one of the reasons why I really don't want to villainize smartphones or tech at all, right? Like it has such incredible power, and if used mindlessly, like if that's the only thing you're doing, or if you're doing that in substitute of connecting with real people, right? Then there are going to be consequences to that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. The mindlessness part, right? And sometimes it can be avoidant, but a lot of times it's just the mindlessness. And so what you're saying is, use it however you feel called to, intentionally. And if it's bringing value to your life, then that's cool. That's good. It's this other stuff that, we naturally drift toward these days. That is more of the issue.
Yep. Yeah. It's about coming off of autopilot, really, is what the whole challenge is about. Like, it's about clarifying your values. What is important to me? Like my average phone use is somewhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours every day. And a lot of that is using the nanny cam to spy on my babies, which I'm going to do that until she is 16. No, I promise I will stop spying on her. So maybe around 11.
She's going to clip this and keep that.
I know. You said, Mom. So I do a little bit of baby spying, and then I use Duolingo because I'm trying to learn Spanish.
Same.
So there's that, like love. I use an app for like chords. Like I'm trying to learn how to play ukulele. Oh. Right. So these very
intentional.
Specific, very intentional, very values oriented, right? Like music is important to me. Learning is important to me. Being a global citizen and like respectful of other cultures is important to me. And spying on my children is also important to me at this stage of my life, right? Just like gazing at them as they sleep. Right. And so it is this very intentional thing, right? So it makes how I'm using that time tolerable. It's like, oh yeah, no, I will give up time in my life for these values oriented, committed actions, right? But is Instagram doing that? Is TikTok doing that, right? Like is the like constant feed of YouTube videos where just like one YouTube video, sure, like you went there, you found it, right? Like maybe somebody's watching this on YouTube and it's like a really meaningful thing for them, right?
Exactly.
Like, which we love that. We love you. Keep watching, right? And
Smash that subscribe button.
yeah, that's right. Don't forget my daughter came home from kindergarten like after the first week and just randomly was like, don't forget to subscribe. And we were like, what the fuck did you just say?
She's like hit that notification bell.
Totally,
Yeah.
right? Like we don't let her watch YouTube or anything
That's
like
funny.
that. But they do these like, so this is another one. So in her kindergarten, they do movement breaks and they'll use something like Danny Go to do a movement break and like gets the kids up and moving.
Right.
And then at the end, he's like, don't forget to subscribe.
Right.
But we were like, what the fuck happened? We sent you to kindergarten and now you're telling us to subscribe to your YouTube channel? Like, what in the actual fuck?
Did you panic for a moment? You're like, this is a mistake. What am I doing?
We did. We were like, Seattle Public School, get it together. Like, what are you guys doing? But no, her teacher's a star. But it's yeah. Make it intentional.
Yeah.
Make it values oriented. Make it something you're choosing to do versus something that you're sort of like falling back into because you don't know what else to do.
That makes sense. Is there anything else you want to mention about your book before we start kind of coming up on time? So you mentioned some aspects of, the challenge. Is there anything else you want people to know about it, as they're thinking about potentially getting it?
You can do it. You can take on this challenge, right? Like it is not so scary. It is not going to hurt you, right? Like you might feel some stuff. You will definitely, if you take it on seriously, you will feel some stuff by design. And there's the potential that the experience that you have doing this challenge generalizes to the rest of your life in a way that's really beautiful and meaningful, right? And so you take this on, you also have an opportunity to see how much of a bigger life is available to you, and you get to like touch and taste that bigger life. So, if that thought like, oh, I can't do that is showing up, just let that thought be a sushi roll on the sushi belt in your mind and let it pass and go take it on.
I have not heard the sushi roll theory of mindfulness before. So thank you for that one.
I got you.
One last sort of like, silly question. If you could have a notification pop up on everyone's phone, they get their notification from you.
Yes.
What would it say?
Look up.
And there you have it, folks.
Yeah. No notes.
Good point.
There was a study that was run that was looking at like present moment awareness, and it sent out notifications to people to say like, what are you doing right now, and are you paying attention to it? And I maybe you can guess, but guess what the number one thing people were doing that they were like actively paying attention to? The vast majority of things they were like, nope, I'm not paying attention at all. I am like totally, I'm in the future or I'm in the past. I'm somewhere else. I'm not paying attention to the one thing. But guess what the one thing that people overwhelmingly were doing when they were paying the most attention?
But
having sex.
There you go.
There you go. Which brings us back to my former life and brings us full circle. So you can pay attention to more in your life than just having sex.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been really, really good talking to you. If people want to follow along with you, where should they be looking? You have the book going on. Where can they be looking for that? Give me the
Yeah.
details.
Yeah, sure. So you can buy the book on Amazon on July 2nd. Look up 30-Day Path to Digital Minimalism and Real Life Maximalism. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can hit me up at my clinic. Email Jennie, Jennie, at westcoastanxiety.com. And if you're in eating therapy, give us a shout. We've got clinicians that serve every state.
Every state, nice.
Yeah, just about every state. But we're more than happy to help you plug in and get the help that you need. So available there too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. If you would like to send a question or a topic for a future episode, please email me at duffthepsych@gmail.com. If you like my approach and would like to learn more about my books, online course, or other resources, please head over to my website at duffthepsych.com. And lastly, it would mean so much to me if you would leave a review for the podcast wherever you listen to it, or share an episode with a friend. Until next time, you got this.